I don't understand, child. What does this mean?
Please, Sheriff, it's the only way.
This changes everything. I'll help you.
Jeremiah Stone had spent 14 years trapping beaver in the high Lonesome Peaks and had finally saved enough gold to buy the farmland of his quiet and solitary dreams. The town of Bitter Creek was a raw collection of clapboard saloons and a dusty auction yard where a sweating crowd gathered around a harried auctioneer waving a sheaf of legal documents. Jeremiah pushed through the throng, his wide shoulders draped in warm buckskin, and fixed his pale blue eyes on the parcel map pinned to the auction block with a rusted nail. He was a mountain man who understood the language of pine sap and elk sign far better than the cunning babble of land speculators and desperate debt collectors on a Saturday afternoon. The auctioneer first sold a rocky quarter section to a wheezing cattleman, then dramatically unveiled the next lot, which was not a piece of land but a trembling, barefoot young woman with a rope around her bruised wrist. Her name was Callista, and she had been bound over to the county to satisfy her late father's unpaid debts in a cruel and shockingly public transaction that drew raucous jeers from the crowd. Jeremiah felt a cold fury rise in his throat as he watched a greasy saloon keeper bid $10 for the girl, licking his lips as if she were a slab of fresh venison hanging on a hook. Without conscious thought, Jeremiah's calloused hand shot into the air, and he barked out a bid of $50, intending only to stop the vile saloonkeeper from claiming the terrified woman as his property. The auctioneer's gavel slammed down with a deafening crack, and before Jeremiah could utter another syllable, he was informed that he had just legally purchased a broken bride and not a hay meadow. Callista flinched at the sound of the gavel, her hollow eyes meeting Jeremiah's horrified gaze with a numb acceptance that spoke of a spirit that had been systematically crushed over many brutal months. He could have protested and torn up the fraudulent deed, but the sight of the bruise on her cheekbone and the trembling of her chapped lips stripped every practical argument from his weather-beaten mind. Jeremiah walked slowly toward her, gently removed the filthy rope from her wrist, and wrapped his own heavy buffalo hide coat around her thin shoulders without speaking a single word of explanation or demand. He purchased a gentle mare for her to ride, a sack of provisions, and they rode out of Bitter Creek together in a silence that was broken only by the steady clop of hooves on the Harpan Trail, leading into the uncharted wilderness. His homestead was a one-room log cabin perched beside a crystal-clear creek, and when they arrived, he immediately moved his own bedroll to the drafty barn to ensure she felt absolutely safe and respected. Jeremiah told her, in his slow and rumbling voice, that she was not a servant, not a possession, and that she could walk away whenever she wished with a full belly and a decent horse beneath her saddle. Callista did not believe him at first because every man she had ever known had proven to be a liar, a brute, or a coldly indifferent stranger who viewed her as nothing more than a burden to be traded. She spent the first week huddled in the corner of the cabin, flinching at sudden movements, but she watched him repair the roof and chop firewood for endless hours without ever demanding a single thing in return. He made her a pallet of soft pine boughs covered with a patchwork quilt, and he placed a tin cup of wild mint tea beside her each morning before disappearing into the woods to check his trapline with his loyal old wolfhound, Grizz. Slowly, like a late spring thaw releasing the grip of a brutal winter, Callista began to stir from her haunted silence and noticed the small, thoughtful kindnesses that peppered her captivity that was not a captivity at all. She observed that Jeremiah never raised his voice, that he sang old mountain ballads to the milk cow, and that he kept a warm Bible on the rough-hewn table, despite never forcing religion upon her wounded and weary heart. One evening, while he was mending a broken harness, she wordlessly took the needle from his fumbling fingers and repaired the leather with a skill that spoke of a former life, filled with competence and prideful craftsmanship. That was the first night she offered him a shy, fleeting smile, and the sight of it struck Jeremiah with more force than a grizzly's paw, awakening a tender protectiveness that he had long thought frozen solid within his solitary chest. Callista began to tend the neglected kitchen garden, her fingers remembering the feel of good soil, and she planted pumpkin seeds on wild rose cuttings that she gathered from the sunny slopes of the nearby butte. She discovered an old spinning wheel in the loft, and before long she was carding wool from the small flock of sheep that Jeremiah had obtained in a trade for a potted olive. And before long she was carding wool from the small flock of sheep that Jeremiah had obtained in a trade for a winter's worth of prime beaver pelts and a bottle of good whiskey. The cabin began to smell of fresh bread and lavender, and the wooden walls that had once echoed only with the wind now hummed with the gentle, life-giving rhythm of a woman's quiet and industrious presence. Jeremiah found himself inventing reasons to linger near the hearth, sharpening his axe for an hour just to hear her hum the old folk songs that she was slowly remembering from a childhood long before the sorrows ever began. He built a proper bedroom addition with a glass window that he packed carefully over the pass on muleback, and he hung a lace curtain that she had knitted from the finest flax thread he had ever seen her miraculously produce. Callista wept when she saw the completed room, her tears soaking into his buckskin shirt as she whispered that no one had ever built anything for her, not in her entire aching and discarded life of servitude and neglect. That night, as a mountain storm raged outside, she told him the full truth. Her father had been a gentle scholar who had been swindled, and the men who had beaten her had been hired by the bank that stole their Pennsylvania farm. Jeremiah listened, his massive hands resting on his knees, and when she finished, he simply said that those men were far away, and here, in this remote valley, she was safe and sovereign and utterly irreplaceable in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. The first time he called her his bride, it was not a command but a question asked with a trembling vulnerability that no grizzly or blizzard had ever managed to extract from the fearsome mountain man's indomitable soul. Callista looked at him for a long moment, her heart pounding like a wild bird trapped in a cage of ribs, and then she rose on her toes and kissed him with a fierce, reclaiming passion that tasted of redemption and the sweet promise of home. They were married under a towering ponderosa pine by a traveling circuit preacher who marveled at the unlikely love story that had bloomed so improbably from an accidental and initially horrifying auction purchase in a dusty frontier town. The homestead that Jeremiah had intended to build for a solitary farmer now became a bustling haven, because Callista's knowledge of herbal remedies and midwifery drew settlers from 60 miles around to their generous and ever-open door. She taught Jeremiah to read the more complicated passages of the Bible, and he taught her to read the tracks of a cougar and the subtle signs of an approaching mountain storm, written in the high cirrus clouds of a cobalt sky. Their first child, a son they named Asher, was born in the lace-curtained bedroom while a late spring snow fell softly outside, blanketing the valley in a quiet as pure and transformative as their own hard-won and precious peace. Jeremiah held the tiny infant in his enormous scarred hands, and he wept without shame, understanding for the first time the depth of the father's love that his own isolated heart had only dimly comprehended before Callista stumbled into his auction gone awry. The accidental bride, who had once flinched at a raised hand, now walked through her sprawling garden with the confident grace of a matriarch, her laughter a bright, cascading waterfall that nourished every soul within its healing and unguarded reach. She trained the local women in the art of spinning, preserving, and the delicate but essential management of a mountain household that could survive the 7-month winters without losing a single soul to cold or famine. Years passed, and the one-room cabin grew into a sprawling ranch house with a wide porch where Jeremiah and Callista sat each evening, watching their children and grandchildren chase fireflies through the tall sweetgrass by the murmuring creek. Travelers and land speculators would sometimes pass through and ask about the old rumor of a mountain man who had accidentally bought a broken bride at a tawdry frontier auction long ago and turned her into a beloved, radiant queen of the high country. Callista would always smile, take Jeremiah's hand, and say that she had not been bought but rescued, and that the most valuable farmland in the territory was not the rich bottomland they now owned, but the fertile soil of a once barren, stony heart that he had given her to tend and to love forever. Jeremiah would add, with a twinkle in his pale eyes, that he had set out to buy a parcel of dirt and had instead been given a treasure beyond all earthly riches, a woman who had taken his lonely, silent existence and filled it with the unending music of a shared and abundant life. The tale of the accidental bride spread across the frontier, and it became a whispered encouragement to every broken soul who believed that they were too damaged, too discarded, or too forgotten to ever be truly known or deeply and irrevocably cherished by another human heart. Callista's wild rose cuttings eventually covered the entire cabin, and every summer the pink blossoms filled the air with a fragrance so sweet that it could stop a weary rider in his tracks and remind him that beauty can grow from the most unlikely and rock-strewn soil of human sorrow. Jeremiah lived to be 91, and when he finally lay down for his last sleep, his hand was still holding Callista's, and his final words were that the auctioneer's mistake was the single greatest, most providential moment of his entire long and blessedly convoluted journey on this earth beneath the watchful and redeeming stars. She buried him under the ponderosa pine where they had been wed, and she lived for 3 more years, telling their story to anyone who would listen, her voice a gentle and unbreakable thread that tied the generations together in a tapestry of hope and radical, transformative kindness. On her own last day, Callista requested a cup of wild mint tea, just as he had made her in that first fragile week, and then she closed her eyes and went to meet her mountain man in a land where no auction gavel ever falls, and no deed of purchase can ever separate the souls who have been knit together by a love that is stronger than any earthly contract or accidental beginning. And so the story was passed down, a testament to the truth that a man can go out seeking a piece of ground to plant his feet, only to find that Providence has planted a broken, beautiful woman directly in the center of his path, offering him the chance to become far more than a landowner, a healer, a husband, a father, and a living example of grace that redeems even the most shattered of accidental purchases. Subscribe to Western Tales Official right now so you never miss another extraordinary tale of frontier destiny where the most profound riches are always found in the hearts of the people you never meant to meet, but were destined to love with a fierce and unending devotion until the very mountains themselves crumble into dust and memory.